Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and a few years back I did a video on crafting character backstories, going over various tips and ways to approach and use backstories in your tabletop role-playing game for both players and for game masters. And because that's a subject that really has a lot more than just a single video can cover on it, it's time to revisit and expand on that topic. So using our first video as our foundation, I've retitled that one as Character Backstories 101, making this our 201 level video. As before, this video is not directed at any one role-playing system, so whether you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, or Call of Cthulhu, or Edge of the Empire, whatever it is, that really doesn't matter for this. Now, some games have backstory elements that are built into the character creation system, and if your game has that, then great. Maybe you can use some of these tips to expand on that. Many of the ideas that I'm going to be offering I have blatantly stolen from various role-playing games that I've played over the years. First, name the characters in your backstory. This one seems painfully obvious, but it's amazing how often players forget to do this. If your character has a sister, name her. If they were trained by a mentor or have an enemy from their past, go ahead and give them a name. If they grew up on a ship, either sailing the seas or flying across the galaxy, tell us what its name is. Simply stating that your character has a sibling and that you both grew up on the streets until a master thief took you under his wing, that isn't likely to get as referenced in the game by you or by the game master if none of those characters have names. If they're not important enough for you to name, then they're not going to be seen as important enough to remember and use later on. Characters or places that are named feel more important and memorable for both the player and for the game master. In the last video, I talked about giving your game master a copy of your backstory, and I stressed that it shouldn't be any longer than what the game master asked for. Giving them a 20-page epic when they only asked for a single-page synopsis is all but assured that your GM is not going to read it. And if they do read it, it's not going to be as easy for them to reference and therefore use, so make the backstory easy to reference. For example, let's say that this is my character's backstory. It's written out across 2 pages, much like a short story, and while it might make for good reading, this isn't laid out in an easy-to-reference way. Rock music blares as you step into the smoke-filled bar. People sit at the various tables, some of them talking and laughing loudly, while others kind of huddle close together and whisper, their hands passing palmed items to one another. Several pool games are going on, but one of the tables looks like it's empty. A few people stand before the stage watching the band. This is Red Blade territory, so I'm going to look and make sure I don't recognize anyone here. And I got an 18 on my perception. You don't recognize any of the Red Blade gangers here, but across the room you notice somebody that looks a little bit familiar. His back is to you, but then he turns his head to say something to a waitress, and you recognize him as, who? Hold on, I know it is in here somewhere. Which one do I see? It's that guy, the one from before. Which one? Am I missing a page? Hold on, I think it's in this paragraph somewhere. Just give me a second. So here we have a game master who's wanting to use an NPC from a character's past and backstory, but because that name has been lost in a wall of text, the game master isn't able to easily find that. Now the game is stalling. So here's some ways to prevent that from happening in your game. First, there's rarely a need to write out the backstory like a novel. A synopsis is probably fine. Bullet points are great for making it easy to reference. Next, names should be put in an easy-to-spot format, maybe all of them in caps or bolded or underlined. Something that I do whenever I get a long backstory is I bold the names of important characters because it makes them easier to find when I'm trying to scan the page. I might even put them in a different color, red for enemies, green for allies, or something like that. And the easier they are to find and therefore use, the more often I'm going to be inclined to use and incorporate those characters in our games going forward. Now, Game Masters, I recommend that you go ahead and tell your players to do this whenever you're asking them to give you backstories. But players, even if your Game Master does not ask you to do this when they're asking you for a backstory, go ahead and do this part for them. Also, if a game master says that yes, they'll gladly take your multi-page backstory epic, then great, but go ahead and include with it a short bullet-pointed synopsis of all the critical details, that way they can easily reference them. This is all going to be the core information that you need to get throughout the backstory, and if the game master wants a little bit more elaboration on any of those details, they can then go and read the longer backstory that you wrote out for them, but the more easy that you make it for them to reference and get to that key information, the better off that both of you are going to be. Next, the game master can overrule parts of your backstory. I know some viewers are already typing out their angry responses to this, but let me explain. The game master is in charge of the game world. They know where the campaign is most likely going to go, and they know what will and won't be the most appropriate for the game. So when they receive a character's backstory, if something doesn't fit into that world or into that story, then the game master should feel perfectly okay in vetoing that. Now, they should also explain why it is they're vetoing that, maybe offer some suggested alternatives that work far better than just simply looking at them and saying no and giving no feedback or direction at all as to what the player should provide. And game masters should really only use this veto when it's really necessary and not without some consideration first as to how both the GM and the player can make that backstory work. But in the end, the player, character, and the backstory are really up to the game master's approval. That's like rule 0 in just about every role-playing game out there. Now, once the game does begin and that character has been activated and we're getting to play the character, the backstory is pretty much locked in. So game masters, if you are going to veto any parts of the backstory, it's best to do that before that character is activated. Next, the characters from your past aren't static. Like with your own player character, they're going to grow, change careers, and become something else. The backstory says who those characters were in the past, but once the game starts, the game master gets to say who they are now. My favorite example of this, and I used this before in another one of my Traveler videos, is Lando Calrissian. Back in Han Solo's backstory, Lando was a gambler, a scoundrel, and just damn smooth. Then, years later, when Han needed help fixing the Falcon's hyperdrive, and he was searching for a safe place to land and get it fixed, his game master decided to bring Lando back into Han's life. But now, Lando was the respectable mayor of a city. That is a big change, but it's no more than Han's own change from becoming a smuggler into a hero of the Rebel Alliance. So game masters, if your player gives you a named character from that character's past, feel free to change and turn them into a totally different character once the PCs encounter them. Don't lock them into whatever role it was that they had during the course of the player character's backstory. If the character's sibling who they grew up with on the street suddenly shows back up after many years, but they're now the wealthy leader of a religious sect, then that is awesome. What a great evolution of that character. And players, if your game master does take a character from your backstory and then cast them in a totally new role, don't resist that. Don't argue with them or say, that's not how I saw that character being. Just go ahead and lean into it. Have your own PC ask that character, like, how did you end up here? What's the story behind that? And backstory NPCs aren't the only characters that should be changing and evolving once the game begins. So should the player characters. The backstory says who your character was and how they got here, but that was also who they were up until the game start. Once the game begins, the character's new experiences should add to and alter them after that. So don't lock yourself into the trap of who your character was is how they're just always going to be after that. The game is really about who your character becomes during the course of their adventures. After a few games, your character should have changed. Maybe they're going to have new skills, powers, or levels, but those are really just the mechanical changes. That's not what we're talking about here today. You should also consider the evolution of the character themselves. Have their values or their motivations or their personality evolved as well during the course of their adventures? This is one of those areas that I do think is very important, and if you feel that your character has had a shift in personality as far as what and who it is that they value, then a player should go ahead and announce that and let the game master know about that evolution. Hey, 3 games ago I said that my character's big motivation was money and that my most cherished person was my childhood buddy, but that's not going to be the case anymore. anymore. This can also help a game master really tailor the games around that character and make the games a lot more fun and personal for you. Game masters, after a few games, if your players haven't told you how their characters' personalities have changed, maybe it's that those players just haven't considered that portion yet, so go ahead and ask them how their characters have changed. Go ahead and update their backstory records that you have to reflect any sort of changes that have occurred in that character. Next, tropes aren't bad. Tropes are familiar storytelling aspects or archetypes. Clichés are what we call tropes that we're tired of or consider overused. So the difference between a trope and a cliché is pretty much subjective. Many gamers out there are going to staunchly avoid tropes, considering all of them just tired and unimaginative clichés deserving of scorn. However, I disagree with that opinion. I don't mind tropes at all. Part of why many of us play these games is giving us the opportunity to play some of our favorite tropes that are out there. So if you want your character to be an orphan, then fine, go for it. Many of my favorite fictional characters were orphans as well. You want to play an elven archer because you read or watched Lord of the Rings and you thought Legolas was awesome? Then cool. I did that for my first D&D character too. Not everything needs to be totally original or something that no one has ever seen before. Often, the reason that nobody's seen that before is because it's kind of a bad idea. Now that being said, while I don't mind tropes, don't feel yourself becoming limited by them. I still want to have a unique character. I want your character, so go ahead and mix it up as far as, what tropes it is you want. Give us a little bit of a mix and match or try something new here. Go ahead and make it your character. Tropes are meant to flavor the PC, not define the PC. And whatever you do, do not make a clone of an existing character. So if you want to have an orphan that becomes a wizard, that's perfectly fine. But don't hand me what's clearly a Harry Potter knockoff, complete with a Dark Lord, facial scar, wicked aunt and uncle who lock him under the stairs, glasses, and maybe the ability to talk to snakes. If your character is exactly like Legolas, then I don't want that character in our group. The reason isn't because I require a totally original character and backstory, but if a player is trying to play Drizzt, then they're essentially locking themselves into the path of Drizzt, railroading themselves before the adventure even begins, and clones rarely grow beyond the characters that they're trying to copy. So while drawing inspiration from your favorite characters and tropes is fine, make the character your own. The reason that I mention this, I'm kind of going off on tropes the way that I am, is it's a response to a common internet advice that I've encountered as some online personality disdainfully puts down tired cliches that they've seen 100 times, which, yeah, sure, maybe they've seen those 100 times until they consider it cliche, but your group might not have seen those before, so it's not going to be a cliche to you. So don't feel that you have to avoid tropes, just don't be limited by them, or don't even feel obligated to play a trope if you don't want to. That's perfectly fine to do. But if someone who's not even in your group that you're playing with considers something that you're playing to be a tired and overused cliche, then really, that's their problem. Next, consider linking your backstory with the other members of the party. For many campaigns, the opening scene is the characters all getting to meet one another, maybe in a bar or a jail cell or something like that. And then we go through the motions of, learning to like one another's characters or even trying to figure out why these characters would all be hanging out with one another in the first place. But is there a reason that your characters can't begin the campaign already knowing one another or being family members? So go ahead and talk with your game master and the rest of your group about that and consider incorporating one another's characters into each of your backstories. This is something that other games like Traveler and Cult include in the character creation process, where we're given the option to link characters together, meaning that the game begins with them already having an established bond. Maybe they went to school together, maybe they served in the military, or they did time together. Maybe a common interest introduced them to one another years before. Maybe they share some sort of dark secret or sort of hidden goal that they have in common. And if the player characters do know each other prior to the start of the campaign, we can incorporate one aspect from the Alien role-playing game called Buddies and Rivals, which is listing who their character considers their favorite and least favorite PC. Now, this doesn't require any sort of in-game mechanical effect. This is really just a roleplay tool of your character's opinion of some of the other members of their party. Their buddy is probably going to be the one that they're going to offer aid to first, while their rival is going to be the one they'll probably be offering aid to last. Doesn't mean that they necessarily hate or dislike their rival, it just means that they're least favorite party member for that PC. And buddy and rival status doesn't have to be reciprocated. These are your character's feelings about the other PCs in the group. So character A might consider character B their best friend, but character B considers character C their favorite. Now, because of that, character A might consider character C their rival because he doesn't think that she's good for his buddy. As I mentioned, characters should be evolving, and who their character considers their buddy in one adventure might not be their buddy by the next adventure, and whoever they consider their rival might eventually work their way into becoming the buddy of those characters, where they kind of go from being opposites and not really liking each other as much to becoming inseparable best friends. Finally, and really what I consider the key part of this video, is the first thing that you need to do is ask yourself, what are the backstories for? Now, the answer to that question can change group to group, but for me, backstories are about establishing the aspects of this character's, well as some roleplay tools and hooks. They need to answer certain questions, and that's really what I want from a backstory. A long, detailed backstory that's written out like a novel doesn't necessarily mean that it's helpful. So instead of asking your players to give you a long and detailed backstory, or maybe in addition to a backstory, you could maybe just add this as well, is to consider doing a survey of questions. Now, this list can change group to group or campaign to campaign, and I have directly stolen many of these from several different RPGs because they're pretty good questions. So you don't need to use all of these questions by any means because I'm about to blast out a lot of them. You might limit yourself to maybe 6 or 8 of these, or the ones that you think are the most important or the most interesting, or you could just simply make up your own questions that are more suited to whatever it is that you're playing. What motivates your character and why? Is it money, power, revenge, family, honor, having a good time, what? This is a simple question, and it is amazing for helping a game master come up with story hooks, and many long and detailed backstories that are more like novels than anything else fail to answer this very critical question. What trait describes you? Are you honest, distrustful, loyal, selfish, frequently chewing your fingernails? Do you laugh a lot, possibly at inappropriate times? This is how you're going to roleplay this character, and it is great for a player to think about whenever they're trying to come up with how they're going to make this character unique. What is your physical appearance? When a character meets you, what is it they see? This just isn't your physical looks like height and hair color, but how does your character dress? Is it bright and expensive clothing or worn out and practical? How do you carry yourself? What is it you smell like? Is it like crisp aftershave or maybe the lingering stink of cigarettes and motor oil? Do you have any notable scars or tattoos or other features that somebody would see about you? What is your dark secret? Or what is your biggest fear? What is your greatest tragedy? Now, these don't have to be big. Your dark secret could simply be something that your character finds embarrassing. But these are leverages and roleplay aspects for both game masters and players to use. Where did you grow up? And I don't mean what city you grew up in, like I grew up in New York, but what was the environment to where you grew up? Like, I grew up in a rundown New York apartment building with rampant crime. Or, I grew up in a luxurious uptown high-rise overlooking Central Park, but my parents' constant fighting meant that I spent as little time there as possible. Both of those, if the player had just said New York, mean vastly different things from one another. Who are your siblings? How many do you have? How old are they in relation to you? What adjective best describes them, such as my athletic younger by 3 years sister Julia and my bookworm brother Eric, who's 1 year older than I am? Who are your enemies and rivals? Give us their names, a few details about them, and what did they do to earn your dislike? Game masters, depending on the player, you might want to set a cap on this at maybe 3 or so, because some players can kind of go a little crazy with this one. What do you hate? Omicrons. Okay, but why do you hate Omicrons? They know what they did. Who is your best friend? And if you have no friends, why not? Who is your hero and why? This could be someone that the character knows or just some famous person that the character knows of. Have you ever hurt another person? How? And do you feel bad about that? What is your proudest accomplishment? What is your biggest goal? Do you live with somebody else? Where and how do you live? Who or what are you the most passionate about? What do you do in your spare time? This is one of those ones that can really round out a character as we discover some sort of hobby or activity that the character likes to do when they're not adventuring. How do you feel about most people? What is your biggest flaw? How do you feel about that? As I've said before, I love a character that's got some flaws, and here we get to establish, some quirks or maybe different things about the character that aren't perfect. Now, these don't need any sort of in-game mechanical effects if you don't want it. They just really have to be just some sort of flaw that that character has. What is your most cherished possession and why? What is your most cherished place and why? And how did you meet the other player characters? These questions can be extremely useful, not just for the game master, but for the players, because they're forcing a player to consider all these different things about their character. A few months back, we were making our characters for a campaign of Cult, and one of the things that you do at the end of that process is you ask each of them this list of questions. My players kind of eye-rolled that I insisted that we do that. We're all veteran gamers that have decades worth of experience under our belts, but we went ahead and did it. And it was through the players considering and answering these questions that we really fell in love with these characters, where they changed from just being characters that are written on a piece of paper to becoming people that we considered separate entities from ourselves and people that we were affectionate about. Personally, this list of questions or this survey is far more helpful to me than just having a simple backstory, because it goes straight to the point and gives us all the important details that we can use, and that everything that a game master wants, or at least all the details that I want and can use as a game master. Now, with this list of questions, the answers, of course, can change over time. A character's experience from one game is going to become their backstory to the next game, and that character should always be evolving. So both players and game masters should periodically revisit these questions and kind of look them over, and any time that the answer to one of those changes, it should go ahead and be noted and announced to the GM and maybe the other players around the table. Now, players, if your game master does not ask you for this list of questions or anything like this, feel free to do it for yourself, because it's really going to help you visualize and be able to play this character as somebody that's very unique and very different from yourself, because now you've considered all these different aspects about them. For me, this part right here is the most important part of a backstory. It's actually more important than giving me a backstory that's written out like a short story or all the details of your life, because this answers the essential questions of where your character came from, what it was that influenced you, who your character is now, and provides us with several interesting characters and events and places that a game master can use. Anyway, that is it for this video. Hopefully you found something here that was helpful to you, either as a player who's wanting to craft a backstory that their game master can use and incorporate in the game, or just a better way of crafting a little bit of information about your character that you can use in your game, because as I mentioned in the previous video, that most of the backstory stuff is really for the players to be using. Or if you're a game master who's wanting to get a little bit more out of your players' backstories in order to have better rounded characters and plenty of details and different things like that that you can use in adventure hooks and really personalize the game for them. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, or how-tos, or just some weird videos about beholders and stuff, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, amigos, y'all have a great day. Seriously, why do you hate Omicron so much? It's too painful to talk about. Dude, please, I just want an answer to the question. Answers? Well, I want answers too. And one day I'm gonna get them.